Presidential Wealth Management. Join us and learn how to find lost money. Money that you may not know about, but may be yours. Why even all 50 states have to give it to you. Where to start and what to do. Kelly, do you hear us now?
I do hear you. Do you want me to enter the room or remain on the phone?
Remain on the phone. So maybe you ask that, Keith.
Do remain on the phone, Kelly. Now, you may be hearing me through your phone. I'm not sure whether you can hear Taylor through the system if she's not in the room. Okay.
So Keith, why don't you just do this? You're going to be the moderator here. You're going to be asking all the questions, and I'll do my best to add any color along the way.
Tell you what, Taylor, when you have a question, relay it on through the system. I can hear both of you, and I'll relay it to Kelly.
Fantastic.
Okay, we got a plan. Okay, Kelly. First question, and let's approach this and get an education. Why do assets go unclaimed? Why is there $80 billion sitting in state coffers mostly? Why does that happen? If we're owed money, why doesn't it come to us?
Right. So oftentimes that's because of a old or missing address, and the financial firm or holder of the asset hasn't been able to find the owner of record. So once that time frame, and each asset has its own time frame, goes unclaimed for a certain period, the money has to go back to the state. So there are certain laws that require certain assets to be claimed within a certain period of time. Otherwise, they have to go back to the state treasury.
Go back to the state treasury. If money goes to the state like that, Frank, I don't know that I trust the state. Doesn't the state immediately find a place to put that money, to use it, to spend it?
They actually can use some of the assets, but they do have to continue to post the unclaimed assets, and there is no time frame for claiming them at the moment.
No time frame for who to claim them? Oh, for us to claim them, right?
Correct.
So does that mean that there can be money somewhere that sat there for 10, 20, 30 years? I don't know, maybe even longer, that if we find it and if we have the legal right to it, we can claim it?
That's correct. I found assets from deceased grandparents who have been deceased for 20, 30 years.
People who have passed 20 or 30 years ago.
That's correct.
Can you go into greater detail? Was that money supposed to have gone to you when they passed away? Was it in a will or a trust or something? And why didn't it, if you had a claim to that money?
In this particular case, my grandparents did have a will and a trust, but these assets were not included in them for whatever reason. Perhaps they forgot about them. And they were very tight with where they had their assets. But the types of assets that are available out there may be unknown to the owner.
Unknown to the owner, and yet someone besides the owner has a right to them?
If they can show they have a legal right, or in the case of my grandparents, I'm in the last living generation. Their children have passed. There's probably an equal claim, and it's something that's still in progress, but we would be the rightful owners as the next generation.
What might that be? Could it be, anything, or does it have to be something in particular?
It could be a number of things. So the types of assets that go unclaimed could be anything from stocks, uncashed dividends, refunds, traveler's checks, actual checking savings accounts, actual investments, royalties, safety deposit box contents, insurance claims. There's a number of things. It could even be, in some cases, perhaps a deposit that was put for a utility or a rental that never went claimed.
A deposit for a utility or a rental. The person who made the deposit passes. The utility owes that money back to that person, but it never gets to that person and they pass.
Correct.
And so therefore that person who passed, their will or trust, or does it have to be a will or trust, has to say that there are beneficiaries and their beneficiaries are owed that money.
It doesn't have to be through a will or trust. You just need to be able to have a rightful claim to it and prove that you do have a rightful claim, which is the tricky part.
You mentioned a list of things. There were some things in that list I never would have thought of, which makes me think there are a whole lot of other things I never would have thought of.
Well, this is interesting.
One of the ways that you can find out what that comprehensive list includes is by going to the National Association of Unclaimed Property, and they will show a list of the types of assets that might go unclaimed and are required to be returned to each state.
And where is that list and how do you find it?
You can go to the National Association of Unclaimed Property, just Google that, and on there they have also a site map, so a map of the United States where you can click on the individual states and start your trail of researching.
Taylor.
Yeah, it's interesting, and I would invite all of you folks to take a moment, and either right now or later. As I was mentioning about the Great Colorado Give Back, it was a kind of a marketing push by the state of Colorado to get some of these unclaimed assets back in the hands of individuals. And during that period, they set up a website. So it's colorado.findyourunclaimedproperty.com. I went in there and searched my name and some of my family's last names, relatives and cousins and like. And what was interesting is I found like a cell phone bill for some random individual, and they actually show who has that unclaimed property, or not only the name, but like what's the source of that. So, it could be like a rebate or something like that, which I found to be fascinating. And then the other side of it is it shows if it's under $50 or over $50, and it kind of can show some ranges there, which I found to be very interesting. So for you watching now, I want to just point this out, and I'll jump into this poll really quickly, and then I'll turn it back over to Keith. But if you will, look under the polls now and answer this question. Have you tried to find unclaimed property for yourself or relatives? I would love to know if you've gone on this little Easter egg hunt, so to speak, to try to find any unclaimed property. So Keith, I'll turn it back over to you.
Kelly. Okay, Taylor relayed a story about the Great Colorado Give Back. And the website, coloradofindyouranclaimedproperty.com. And he had actually gone there and had some experience with it and found that even rebates from cell phone bills or purchases could be found on that site, and that they talk about over or under $50 amounts. So we want to ask you and your experience or your knowledge with regard to that. And also, FYI, we have a poll up right now that says, have you tried to find unclaimed property for yourself or relatives? Yes, you couldn't find anything. Yes, I found unclaimed property. And no, never even crossed my mind. We'll give you the results of that poll in just a minute, and people are piling in on it. So Kelly, the question back for you is coloradofindyouranclaimedproperty.com. Anything you have to add with regard to that? And we add to the list of things, thank you, Taylor, of things that you may be entitled to, and those are rebates. Kelly.
Yes, so two things about that. I recommend going through the National Association of Unclaimed Property and direct to the state site or through missingmoney.com, because where there is money, there are people that are trying to get a percentage of that. So I'm not familiar with the site that Taylor used. It may or may not be legitimate, but the National Association of Unclaimed Property site directs people to the legitimate sites. So that would be my first suggestion there. Missingmoney.com does have a number of several states, including Colorado, on that list.
Which brings a question to mind for me is that, Kelly, you've just suggested that if I have assets that I have no idea that I have somewhere, and this is the first it's ever occurred to me that it's even there for my taking if I pursue it properly and claim it, that in the world we live in today, there are other people who are after that money too, who are after
Absolutely.
that. Do tell.
Absolutely. So there are people that have actually a brokerage where they can help you find that, and they can charge a percentage or a flat fee, and it may or may not be worth it. 70% of the claims are under $100, but there has been a case in Missouri where the highest claim was $6.1 million.
Wow.
If we're talking beneficial, for example, life insurance claim, that could be a substantial amount of money. So it's a beware kind of situation where there are assets and money like that. There may be people trying to take advantage of you in looking for those funds.
There are people trying to take advantage of everything and everybody. Taylor. Yeah.
So the National Association of Unclaimed Property, folks, it's unclaimed.org. So just for our listeners. And I just went through the process, and actually that Colorado.findyourunclaimedproperty.com is the actual state-based website that our folks can go through, that is for the state of Colorado. But this is what's interesting, and I want Keith to get to this, is that it's not always just in Colorado. It's not just in the state that you actually live. Kelly, Keith, would you relay this? Where is this money, and how, what's going on with that?
Kelly, Taylor just did some quick work on the internet and found out that unclaimed.org is like the national parent organization of Colorado findyourunclaimedproperty.com. So it's kind of a structure there. And you can get either one of them. You can go to either one of them on the internet, which brings up the question that Taylor suggested. Money that we're talking about, lost money or money that unclaimed assets that you have no realization that you have it. Does it matter where it is? What if it's halfway across the country? What if it's around the world? What if it's in a state you don't live in? Does any of that matter? And does any of that keep you from being able to find it and claim it?
So that's an interesting question, Keith. But absolutely, the money could be in another state. Even if you lived in Colorado your entire life, if you had unclaimed assets and they don't have a known address, the money may be going back to the state in which the company that held the money is incorporated. That's what the rule is. So, for example, if you bought insurance from a company that was housed out of Connecticut, for example, and they can't find your last known address, the money may go back to where they are incorporated, whatever state that may be. One of the sites suggests that Delaware is one of the largest places for people to incorporate because of tax reduction. So your money could be sitting in Delaware, even though you've never been there, never lived there. I did find unclaimed assets out of state for myself.
Oh, you did?
I did.
What state, may I ask?
I found assets in the state of Nevada. I'm still in the process of the claim, but it's very likely that it was associated with a rebate on a credit card.
How much money are we talking about?
I'm not sure at this particular time. When you go to each state, some of them will tell you that the amount is under a certain amount or over a certain amount, but they don't give you the exact amount until you actually file the claim. Other states do disclose the amount once you hit the claim button and say, yes, this may or may not be mine. and they give you instructions on how to claim.
Let's say it was under $50. The question then arises, how much does it cost you to go after and get that amount of less than $50?
That would depend. So if on the claim forms that I received from Colorado, what they asked for was proof of identity and then proof that the address they had on file, the last known address, was my in fact address. So it may mean having to prove that you lived there or owned that property at some point in time.
And when you're doing this, can you send documentation by email?
They have encrypted sites that you can upload the documentation in for each site or for each state.
Encrypted sites. So the states are savvy with this, or at least with their obligation to do this by law. And and it sounds like they paved the way for their own compliance.
That's correct.
They make it easy. Taylor.
So this is an interesting conversation because, we go through this from time to time, and, we'll have advisors that move on and, or switch companies or retire, or somehow, they're no longer with the firm. And, whether or not, sometimes, clients get communicated with, like that's the bare minimum. We send them a letter, email, send them the contact information. But then sometimes there's no response. There's no way to reach these individuals. And in our case, it's the term is escheated, which is basically to say that they're sort of abandoned property and they've got to go somewhere. So I believe we went through this about 3 years ago. And it was kind of an interesting process because all of a sudden you're going through these accounts and maybe they're not very big accounts, or, I guess it's a good problem to have if you have a brokerage account and you just kind of neglect it or forget about it. But it's a very interesting world to live in because this money just goes back. Now, this is what's interesting. A lot of those accounts that kind of had the red flags of being abandoned in our situation, these were accounts that were opened, let's say in the late 90s or early 2000s. And maybe there was a landline number that was associated to the account, or there was no email associated to the account. And then, there's a good chance that physical address that we were sending the letters, that individual no longer lived there. So, those three methods. Well, what's interesting is that with the evolution of the cell phone, or the de-evolution of the landline, as an example, my parents are in their late 60s, early 70s, and they don't have a landline. So if somebody were trying to reach them at their old number that I grew up with, well, it's going to go unanswered. So what's interesting is the things that have changed. So if that might be if you might be the individual that, maybe got rid of their landline or have moved within the last 15, 20 years, or maybe opened an account before an email address was required of you, that might be a clue into unclaimed property that you have that maybe was back from the 80s or 90s or even earlier than that. So my question to Kelly is, what goes around there? Like, is it this idea that the contact information is bad? Like, why do people have these, she kind of touched on it before, but why do people have unclaimed assets?
Kelly, Taylor brings up a very interesting question, and I'm going to tell you what the end question is and then work my way to some of the things he offered. And the question is, why do people have unclaimed assets? One would think that in the world we live in, communication is everything. Everybody has a cell phone, right? Everybody can be reached. Everybody can be found on the internet. Taylor brings the point to a company like ours. We sometimes have advisors that move on. We sometimes, when advisors move on, sometimes all of the clients aren't picked up. We then feel it is our responsibility. We know it's our responsibility to try and contact those people and service those people, but we can't reach them. And Taylor says we never know. People have dropped cell phones or have dropped landlines and gone to cell phones. And that can be a dead end for us, unable to find a cell phone number. And then there is always the escheatment, where funds will then, after a certain period of time, and we'll ask you to explain that a little bit more, revert to the state, as you explained before. Doesn't necessarily have to be the state you live in. Could it be the state that's connected to whatever the funds are connected with? And so it ends up being a really funny thing, because it ends up being an impossibility to find people when we live in a world that has more communication capability than the world has ever had before. And so, Kelly, contact info that is bad, that can sometimes be our own fault. Or it can be the fault of people that we had or have or had a relationship with, that they didn't provide the information that's needed to get the money where it should go. Kelly, your comment on all of that.
Keith, you're exactly right. Having been in the financial services industry for a long time in other capacities, we didn't ask for emails before probably 2005, or maybe a handful of people had them, but it wasn't even on the application at that point. So email addresses are a fairly new add-on to protect assets and be able to find people. Landlines, as you mentioned, may have gone by the wayside. And I know in the case of doing reviews for people, particularly older clients, a lot of them would provide ways to contact them through their employer. They would give work employment addresses, email addresses, or phone numbers. And then, of course, that when they retire, that information is no longer valid. And then another area is when you list your beneficiaries. For example, if we've got an IRA account, you might list your beneficiaries, but just give us a name and maybe a date of birth. And by the time they're trying to locate these beneficiaries, they may have married, changed names, moved out of state, or have different contact information. So keeping that information up to date is critical.
And what percentage of Taylor, I'll ask you for your guess on this, and Kelly, I'll ask you for your guess on this. What percentage of people keep their information up to date?
Well, this is my little PSA to the world. When we call you, and it might seem a little annoying, and we verify that your email is still, first name, last name at gmail.com, or that your cell phone, it's because of these types of situations. It's that we want to make sure that we've got the primary contact information and primary way to contact you. So my guess is that I would say it's 60%.
Okay, Kelly, Taylor says it's our responsibility to contact people when they appear to have slipped into whatever and gone away. But sometimes we experience difficulty in trying to do that. Taylor said, Taylor, what was your number again? I wrote it down, then got off on a tangent myself. 60% don't.
60% of people do a good job of keeping us up to date on their contact information.
60% do?
Yes, they do. I in my experience, but we make a very deliberate attempt to say, hey, just checking, is this good information? And they're like, yes, it is, for the 50th time.
Okay, Kelly, Taylor says that it's been his experience that he thinks 60% of people do a good job keeping their contact information up to date. What's your response to that, Kelly?
I would say that number is probably fairly accurate, but I think it is also different by generation.
How so?
I think younger people are more apt to know that they are moving and shifting and changing on a regular basis and are not going to provide work email addresses and things like that. But older generations that have been more stable tend to think their address and their phone and their emails are more constant and may provide us with more challenging follow-up data.
So is she suggesting that we are not stable as younger generations?
Taylor says, are you suggesting that his generation is more unstable? Are you suggesting that? Kelly, have we got you? We lost her again.
Oh, bummer. Gosh. All right. Well, we've had some challenging situations.
I think that's, I'm not suggesting they're more unstable, just more cautious about providing fluid information.
More cautious, you say, about providing fluid information. So are you telling us that they're more private? Younger people?
Not necessarily, but they will probably provide a Gmail or an account that they plan to always use and are not going to provide something that's going to change.
Okay.
Yep.
Just an update. Kelly St. George is a wealth advisor with Presidential Wealth Management and has experience with finding lost money. And we're looking at that whole process of money that you may never have had the information to even realize that you have a right to, and yet it exists and it can be found and you can claim it. And Taylor just put up a poll a little while back, and look at those numbers, Taylor. I'm surprised with that.
Oh, wow. Yeah. 83%.
83%, Kelly. The question is, have you tried to find unclaimed property for yourself or relatives? 83% say yes, and they couldn't find anything. Nobody says, yes, I found unclaimed property, and 16% says no, never even crossed my mind. I can relate with never even crossed my mind because I'm learning so much in this conversation. But I'm forced to wonder, Kelly, about 83% of people said yes, they've tried and they couldn't find anything. Is that simply because there isn't anything, or is it because they didn't know where to look?
Keith, I think that's twofold. I had looked in the past on the Colorado payback sites for my own name and never found anything. I think what's happening, though, is we've got more information now about why you would look outside of your own state. And the second thing is knowing that the claim may be for generations prior. It may not be your name. It may be your parents, your grandparents. So knowing that a claim could be out there for assets that you might be the rightful owner of, but may not be in the name you searched or the state you searched, or for that exact criteria.
Kelly, you've said that 1 in 10 people have money like this somewhere that can be found and claimed. And now you've added a complication, and I have to ask you, help me. How do I do this? Because it might not even be in my name. So does that mean I have to go in and do searches under all of my relatives' names, my parents? I go, whoa, that sounds like a lot of work.
I kind of went down a rabbit hole on my own, just in my own curiosity, because my father did pass away a few years ago. And then once I looked under his name, I thought, well, I'm going to look under my grandparents' name. And that's where I found assets. I also found pages for an aunt and uncle, and I actually copied and sent it off to my cousins so that they could file a claim. And they were assets that I know for sure belonged to that person because of the address that it was showing and the name. And these are people that have passed on, but the rightful heirs, their children, would have had no idea those were sitting out there.
Absolutely amazing, and I'll admit, a little bit intimidating. So as I'm thinking about if I were to undergo this process, the first thing I might want to do is get an accurate family tree. Is that correct?
Right. So putting down names, not only current names, but maiden names. That's where some of the assets of my own I found were in my maiden name.
And so start with that. What's the next step?
Trying to figure out where documents might be in terms of was there a will or estate? Do you have power of attorney? Do you have a right to claim them? And sometimes that means asking the family. Sometimes that means a little more research to professionals that might have been associated with the relative. And really kind of building, like you said, a family tree of, well, is it possible that this person in this generation may have had something, and should I look, and where do I look? Where did they live? You know, not just a family tree of birth dates and dates of death, which I didn't even know those. I had to, but fortunately, obituaries are available online nowadays. You can pretty much find anything. So it is easier to search, but yes, there is some background data that needs to be gathered first.
So start with names, locations, then gather information, when and where, geographically, right? So then you've got names, you know where they lived, you gathered information about when they lived, and where do you go from there?
There you can go into the individual state sites and start your search. It can be a rabbit hole. So I recommend working with somebody to get the right questions answered, possibly even knowing where companies that they may have worked for were incorporated. That can be a little bit of a search, but definitely working with somebody and trying to get some assistance with it.
And you, a while back, had a project like this as an advisor, as a wealth advisor at Presidential Wealth Management, that you got involved in and helped someone do this. You worked them through the whole process, and it was quite an endeavor, wasn't it?
Right, it was. So we had a client with escheated assets that went back to the state. They had reached out after it was too late and the money had already been turned over. So usually there's a notification sent out that says, hey, these are going to go unclaimed. They're going to have to go back if we don't hear from you. And they had not responded until it was too late. The process was daunting. It took 2 years and could have been shortened up a little bit with a little bit more diligence on the client's part. But they did reclaim $80,000.
Whoa. Took 2 years, but then $80,000 was well worth it.
Well worth it.
Yikes. And where was that money found? Did a state have it?
Here, with the state of Colorado.
State of Colorado. And they are bound by law. Once you provide the required information and you go onto a website that they have for you to do that, they're bound by law to return that money to you.
Right. So you send your documentation. There's a little bit of back and forth. As soon as you find yourself on a site, once you hit claim on however many assets you see on that state, they will send you the form to get started and what documentation is required. So it's a matter of keeping up with what they're asking, and I believe that none of it's going to take weeks. I think in almost all cases, no matter how small the claim, it's going to take months and hopefully not years. But part of that is also how you respond and when you respond to their request.
Well, you could look at it this way. You could forget about it and it would be a surprise if it took years. Taylor.
Right.
Taylor.
Yeah, the Colorado payback website actually has a great area at the bottom of the site, just with some FAQs, and then also they actually go into the unclaimed property law. So if you're one of those that likes to pull on the string, so to speak, go to the website and just check it out. It's at least worth your time. For those 18% or so, 16% that said they didn't even think about this, take the moment and go to colorado.findyourunclaimedproperty.com and do your own search. I think it's very well worth your time. So I'll punt it over to Kelly here. And I guess, how do we ensure that we don't have assets go unclaimed?
Kelly, so Taylor points out that there are some good things on unclaimed.org or the Colorado version of it, Colorado Find Your Unclaimed Property.com, FAQs and unclaimed property law FAQs. And Taylor just offering that up information wise, but then Taylor poses the question back to you. How do we make sure that we haven't created this problem ourselves? How do we spare our heirs and our beneficiaries from having to do all this?
That's a good question. So I would suggest that with any place that you have a financial, either an account or you have perhaps any type of a relationship financially, that you are contacting them and seeing what they have on file. Make sure that you update beneficiary information on a regular basis and that you have this place, something stored securely and with someone securely that you trust. I think it's a matter of updating and making sure that the information is accurate on a regular basis, not just at the moment when you open the account. And that you continually think about the fact that something potentially could happen to you, and how would somebody else go back and claim those assets.
Kelly, thank you so much. This has been educational. I'm sorry. We're sorry that we were hampered a little bit by the internet and the programs and all that, and probably my understanding of it. I don't know, but you have made up for that hugely. And Kelly, again, is available to take your questions if you have them about this. If you suspect that if you've done some of this work and have had a roadblock, or if you just would like some further advice from Kelly about this and everything that goes with it. She is an advisor, a wealth advisor with Presidential Wealth Management. She works out of our Greenwood Village office, and she can be reached at that main number, 303-694-1600. So Kelly, thank you. Let's do it again. Let's let a little bit of time go by and I do it again. I think it's wonderfully valid information, and maybe this time we'll get the internet right and be able to see you as well as hear you.
Thank you.
Our pleasure.
This is such an interesting conversation because it almost goes into this world of like somewhat like estate planning. You know, Kelly talked about beneficiaries and making sure that those are up to date. And sometimes, and you know, I think we're all a little bit guilty of it, but you say, all right, who do you want to be your beneficiaries? And you might be like, just put Roger, Jane, and Bill. You're like, all right, great. I'll put Roger, Jane, and Bill. 30, and then you go, which one do you like more? And they're like, of course we like Jane. She's going to get 34%, and the other boys are going to get 33%. And we say, fantastic, that's awesome. But if there's no way to contact them in the event that something happens to the account owner, then that's where that money can kind of go into this never land, and that can be really, really detrimental. So that was one of the big takeaways that I had for you today, and something that I got from Kelly. So again, with those folks that haven't maybe looked at their beneficiary information, take that time to see that not only that the right people are named, but that they have at least good contact information, because that's where some of this money could go into this dark hole.
Yeah, that is such good advice, because in my own experience, what Taylor just described is exactly correct. And sometimes we'll encounter a couple, or you may be doing this with your advisor. You're opening an IRA or something, and it has a considerable amount of money in it, and you list a primary beneficiary. And you say, well, that's good enough, because we're going to live forever, right? And something happens and it takes both of you out at once. That's asking for it. And if I'm not minimizing it, but I'm saying it goes to how you're going to be remembered. And so it's well worth the while doing a little work that you might have thought was disagreeable, but actually what you're doing is you're controlling the experience of people that will survive you. And you're basically controlling what they're going to say about you. And so I don't know. I mean, that's a positive thing to look at. It's worth putting a little bit of effort into. Make it a fun project. You're going to contact relatives. You're going to contact kids and grandkids. You're going to gather up some information, and you're going to have some good conversation and get updated on their lives in the process. It can be a positive thing.
And there's another thing that we've been doing in our office, and this is something that if your advisor is not doing, you should absolutely be asking. We've been adding what we call trusted contacts to all of our accounts. This started really as a outreach to typically our older clients, but we found that this to be tremendously powerful because it wasn't a beneficiary necessarily. It could have been, but oftentimes it was, let's say a brother or a sister that was maybe not part of the primary or contingent beneficiaries, but somebody that you kept in contact with a lot. And so we started with our older clients just because, there's a lot of concern around seniors getting taken advantage of and things like that. And so if we get contacted and we need to make sure that we can go to this other person, this trusted contact, and it's not necessarily a legal thing where they can't act on your discretion, but it's a way for us to reach out to that person and say, hey, is everything okay? And so we've been using this trusted contact as a great way to deepen our relationship with our clients, but also in the event that something happens, that person, that trusted contact, can be a great person to go to, a great quarterback to say, hey, something happened to this client or whatever, and who should I talk to that might be a beneficiary or an heir to this account? So those are certainly some things that we do on our end to ensure that our clients have the best information and actually the best client experiences that we can have.
What a tremendously valid point. And ask yourself, have you had that conversation with whomever you're working with, whoever is managing your money, and in doing so, controlling your quality of life for the rest of your life? It should go way beyond the market. It should go way beyond where and really how your money is invested. The where and how your money is invested should depend on information like this. How important is it for you to make a difference in the lives of beneficiaries, of children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, all of that? You can be in control of all of that. And that's something that should go into any financial plan, as Taylor well knows, being a certified financial planner. And it should go into the amount of risk you're taking with your money. So all we're saying is go beyond the simple things. If you're working with an advisor that hasn't gone in depth with you about things like this in your life and how you feel and what you want after you're gone, perhaps make an adjustment there. Taylor.
So this is a beautiful moment because Kelly did a wonderful job of walking us through this process. And honestly, it's convoluted. It's a little bit scary because there can be a lot of maybe traps. There's a lot of holes that you go down or rabbit holes that you can go down and not really find out about a whole heck of a lot. So one of the things that we want to do is make sure that, at least because we've gone through this experience, at least to some extent, whether it was from our own perspective or another client, I helped a client research a pension that he thought he had out there. In the end, we weren't able to find anything, which was good because we actually had a resolution. There was something definite about what happened, even though what he ended up finding is that he had taken a lump sum. And this was back in the late 70s when he had done all this. So it was kind of, a foggy memory, but it was a good way to go through this. And this is the process that we did. So what we will do is, as a special offer to you, to do a 30-minute review. And we'll go through some of the states that you have going on. Spend about 30 minutes helping you identifying if you have unclaimed property out there and ways and strategies that you can go about finding that. Kelly has been a wealth of knowledge. She's been helping individual clients, and this is something that she's found a lot of value with her clients. So if you're interested in looking at maybe unclaimed property that might be in not just your name, but your family's name, with your relatives, aunts, uncles, mothers, fathers, cousins, brothers and sisters, take a moment, schedule some time to meet with us, and we'll spend 30 minutes going through it. And maybe if nothing is resolved, we at least kind of pushed you in the right direction. So take the time, use the offer button, schedule a meeting with us. It's going to be a free 30-minute consultation to do a review of unclaimed property that might be out there and for you to grab.
Taylor, it's always a pleasure.
Always.
For Kelly St. George, Taylor Leary, I'm Keith Weinman. And remember, we're only part of a team that's here to help you at Presidential Wealth Management. 303-694-1600. Presidential Wealth Management securities and investment advisory services are offered through Forta Financial Group, Inc., a registered broker-dealer, member FINRA and SIPC.